中等的广播讲话让老乡咋咯？刚刚入住正业正正业的南大老师为正业东跟这上首先年纪的个老王，刚到这边做了马路门东等我就是为着做个老王就到这样了就这样的。这点接着你忙你老了接着中咋讲马路门在等我那个正业正在打着。多年打仗三军打仗要当里做家这头个这抓这当这年间去道路们在人家伙要拉的马拉巴扎那的马拉巴扎那的马拉巴扎那的马拉巴扎马拉巴扎那的马拉巴扎那的马拉巴扎那的马拉巴马拉巴扎那的最近最近见了我在这街道路的门巴拉山挂当当就上了东巴路主不别那瓦记得说了了解进步做的你没想说的么能进步俺家把个人当俺咱都什么都东巴的街将老上茶路好，各位法师，各位道友，大家下午好。
Good afternoon to everyone.
我们现在开始讲今天下午的课啊。讲课之前，请大家发菩提心。
We are going to now begin with this afternoon's teaching, and before we do so, please everyone make an aspiration of bodhicitta.
那么菩提心呢，我们今天早上给大家简单介绍过了。我们不需要再重复。我们简单的说，我们发愿，我为了让天下所有的众生成佛，为了达到这个目标，首先我自己要成佛。我为了成佛，今天学习修心这样子发愿，这个叫做菩提心。
So we talked about this morning what it is that we mean by bodhicitta, so there's no need for us to go over this. Just in a nutshell, bodhicitta is the aspiration or the vow to assist all other beings in attaining Buddhahood, and in order to achieve this purpose, determining to attain Buddhahood first for oneself. And it is with this purpose and motivation in mind that we study and practice the Dharma. This, in a nutshell, is the aspiration of bodhicitta.
好，那么我们今天上午给大家介绍了这个寂知的修法。今天下午呢，还有一些寂知的一些内容，我们今天上午没有讲完的，继续给大家讲。
So this morning we briefly looked at a shamatha meditation practice, and I'd like to continue talking about this practice now, explaining various things that we didn't have a chance to talk about this morning.
我们今天上午讲的这个禅修的方法，就是看释迦牟尼佛的像，然后通过这个看佛像，然后就修这个禅修。
So the method that we introduced this morning was keeping our gaze concentrated on a Buddha image, and in so doing cultivating meditative concentration.
因为我们在现实生活当中，我们每一个人的心是非常的浮躁，静不下来，要静下来1分钟都非常非常的难，所以我们的心总是想找到一个可以去看的、可以去抓的地方、可以去执着的地方，所以我们先就让他去看这个佛像。让他就专注于这个佛像这样子的话，稍微比较容易静得下来。
In our everyday lives, our minds are usually in a very restless state. They're so restless that even to calm them down for a period of 1 minute is difficult. So because our minds are habitually looking for something to focus on or grasp onto, what we do with this meditation method is first let our minds focus on a Buddha image, and in so doing it's easy for them to be brought into a state of calmness.
然后我们特别的去专注佛的心间，也就是说我们全神贯注的去专注佛像的这个心间或者是美间那这个时候呢，我们就过去的去思考过去，思考未来，思考现在的这些念头全部放下，也就是说不要有任何的念头，心非常的平静的达到一个非常的平静的状态。
So by focusing our gaze, focusing our concentration on the point at the Buddha's heart or the point between his eyebrows, it is possible for us to cease our thoughts about the past, the future, and the present, and to rest in a state of great stillness.
我们的心我们讲的心是什么呢？第一个不是大脑，我们不是指的是大脑，大脑这个物体它只是一个物体而已，它只是一个物质而已，不是它。然后第二，也不是我们的这个心脏心脏也是一个物质而已，都不是这些，不是大脑，不是心脏。那我们的心，我们讲的心是什么呢？能够感受这个世界上的所有东西的一个这样子的力量，这样子的能量就在我们的身体里面。那这个能量或者这个力量叫做心。
So when we speak of the mind, we're not referring to the brain. The brain is matter. It's material. So we're not speaking of the mind and the brain as being the same thing. Similarly, when we speak of the mind, we're not talking about the heart. The heart as well is simply matter. So when we say mind, we are really talking about that force or that capacity which is able to perceive the entire world around us.
它就像电池里面的电电池里面的电用我们的肉眼看不见它在什么地方，但是仪器可以测量它的存在。同样的，比如说用我们的肉眼或者是 X 光之类的东西来看我们的身体，或者是医生的这个手术刀下面看不到我们的这个心但是呢，我们自己感觉到我们就是有一个这样子的能量。
So our mind is like the power inside a battery. We can't see this power with our naked eyes. However, it's possible for us to verify its presence. We can test a battery to see whether it has power or not. Similarly, our mind is not something that can be revealed with an X-ray machine or something that can be exposed by the surgeon's knife. The presence of our mind is something that we can directly experience for ourselves.
电依赖电池存在但是呢，电和电池不是一个东西，因为没有电也可以有电池。
So, whilst power relies on a battery in order to exist, it's not the same thing as a battery. The reason being that it is possible for the power to be separate from the battery.
那我们讲的心就是一个这样子的这个力量，叫做心。那么这个心，它实际上是非常的简单，就我们自己的 这个心它可以感受它可以感受到它自己的存在，就不需要其他的仪器，不需要其他的逻辑来推理它的存在。
So we can speak about the mind in comparable terms to this. The mind is something that we don't need any additional thing or process of logical reasoning to establish its existence. It's possible for itself to directly experience its existence.
我们的心就像水一样，它是透明的。
So our mind is like water, it's translucent.
然后如果我们不去动它不去打扰它的话，它可以达到一个非常非常平静的状态，也就是像水我们不去动它，它可以在湖里面或者是在任何一个容器里面可以很平静，非常的平静。
So our mind, if we don't disturb it, is able to achieve a state of great stillness, just as water in a lake or water in any kind of vessel, if it is not disturbed, then it can rest in a very still state of stillness too.
然后如果有东西来动它，比如说刮风或者是容器的动摇，那就水也就开始震动，或者是在大海上有风有大风的时候，就是波涛汹涌也就是非常的厉害的。那我们的心也是这样，如果有人去动它，动的时候呢，然后它也可以发展到一个非常严重的地步。
However, if we were to move the water or to agitate it in some way, say, for example, wind to blow the surface of water in a lake, or for us to shake the water in a vessel, then it would begin to show sign of movements and waves. And the same goes for our minds as well. If we disturb them, if we agitate them, then it's possible for them to become extremely turbulent.
然后水从液体可以变成固体，从液体也可以变成气体。
So water is able to go from a liquid state to a solid state. At the same time, it's also possible to transform from a liquid state to a vaporous state.
同样的，我们的心从无色、无心、无色的状态变成有心有色。比如说，我们做梦的时候，我们看到的形形色色的世界，实际上就是我们的心的投影，是它创造的世界。
And the same goes for our minds. It's possible for them to go from our mind to go from a formless state to taking on one of form. So, for example, during our dreams at night, all that the forms that we perceive in our dream states are actually nothing but the projections of our mind.
然后我们的心从现在我们的心也可以，比如说像液体可以变成这个气体，蒸发为气体一样，我们的心也就可以从我们现在现实生活当中的有思维、有判断能力的这个心，也可以变成一个非常非常宁静非常安静这样子的状态。
And just as water is able to transform from a liquid state to a vapor state, it's possible for our minds to move from a state of analytical and investigative activity to a state of stillness and calmness.
从佛教的角度看，心也是一种物质啊。这个世界上物质有很多很多种物质，我们认为物质就是像石头、砖头这样子，这种想法是错误的。物质有很多不同形式的物质，所以我们的心也就是物质当中的一部分。
So in Buddhism, we still regard our minds as being a kind of matter, just a different kind of matter to that which we usually understand matter to being. In fact, matter incorporates a great range of different kinds of matter. So simply understanding matter to be things like stone and wood, etc., is not a complete understanding.
所以我们要控制自己的心，如果能够控制自己的心，等于就是控制了整个的世界，对我们自己而言。
So, in respect of ourselves, being able to control our own minds is the equivalent of being able to control our entire universe.
如果我们的心，内在的心失控了这样子的话，我们的家庭、工作，甚至是整个的世界都是混乱，都变成混乱的状态。
If we lose control of our minds, then everything in our life, our family life, our working life, etc., becomes chaotic.
所以我们自己的内心的训练比任何一个训练包括身体的训练，比任何一个训练更重要。
So for this reason, training our minds is actually the most important kind of training that we can do, even more important than training our physical bodies.
实际上，一个人的一生过得幸福和不幸福，都是以我们的心来决定。
In actual fact, whether or not we live a life that is happy is determined by our minds.
一个人的人生过得有意义和没有任何的意义，也就是以我们的这个心来决定。
And so too, whether we live lives that are meaningful or not is also determined by our mind.
很长时间人类就是非常非常的着重物质，然后就是没有太多的去关注人的内心这样子以后呢，我们现代人的这个每一个人的内心很多，不能说每一个，很多人的内心非常的不健康。
For a very long period of time, humans have been fixated on material things and have not paid a lot of attention to the state of their minds. So this has resulted in a situation where the minds of many people are very unhealthy.
如果我们人的心我们人心当中，比如说缺少了比如说像慈悲心、爱心这样子的东西，只要缺少了一个这样子的一个因素，那整个世界都慢慢的变成非常非常的冷漠。
Even the lack of one quality that we need in our minds, such as compassion or loving kindness, just lacking one of these can result in our entire world becoming extremely cold.
就像我们的人的身体里面的某一个化学的成分发生了变化，就会导致整个人的身体的变化一样。
So this is exactly the same as the way that just one chemical reaction inside one's body can influence our entire physical system.
所以我们忽略了自己的内心的这个提升或者是忽略内心的训练这个其实是一个很大的错误。
So for this reason, neglecting to train our minds or to improve our minds is a great mistake.
所以我们要花一点时间每一个人都要花一点时间来打坐修行，训练自己的心。
So everyone really needs to spend a due amount of time meditating, practicing, and training their minds.
在现实生活当中，我们的心几乎都是一个，比如说一个水非常非常浑浊的状态一样。我们基本上24小时当中深度的睡眠以外基本上就是停留在一个水变成非常浑浊的时候一样，我们的心就是这么混乱浮躁、狂躁这样子的状态。
In our everyday lives, our minds really exist for the majority of time in a state that is similar to turbid water. In a 24-hour period, aside from that period of time that we are in deep sleep, our mind exists in a state that is like water on the verge of becoming turbid. So our minds are usually agitated, restless.
现在我们通过禅修的方法把我们的心就是变成这瓶水一样的透明，一样的干净，这个就是我们的工作的目标，训练的目标。
So what we're doing here with this meditation is seeking to bring our minds into a state of stillness and translucence. This is how we are seeking to train our minds.
那一个浑浊的水怎么样让它变成一个非常干净的水？大家基本上都知道，就是把它放在一个容器里面，不要去动它，然后呢几个小时以后呢，它自己慢慢的变成了像这瓶水这么干净的。我们不需要其他的仪器来过滤加工，它自己会变成透明干净的。
So everyone knows how to make turbid water clean or clear. We only need to put it in a vessel and leave it there. There's no need for us to do anything else to it or to use any other kind of device, such a filter. We can simply let the water rest in the vessel.
这样子最好的方法就是不要去干扰它，不要去动它，让它自己的能力就变成恢复它的原来的状态。
So the best approach is not to disturb the water, not to shake it, but to allow its own capacity to restore its original state of clarity.
好，这个方法呢，我们现在就是上午给大家介绍的一样，我们的两只眼睛看在佛像的心间，然后我们的心也就专注于佛的这个心间，然后一动不动，不去思考任何的事情，心它一定会静下来，只不过它的时间不是很长而已，它完全是可以静下来的。
So by focusing our two eyes on the point between the Buddha's eyebrows or the point at the Buddha's heart, with unwavering concentration, not giving rise to thought about anything, it is possible for us to bring our minds into a state of stillness. Perhaps this stillness won't last for a long time, but it is nevertheless very possible for us to still our minds in this way.
好，这个时候我们不思考，不去思考不想，什么都不想。很多人问我们禅修的时候呢，到底想还是不想？如果要想，那到底想什么？那禅修有很多种禅修，有些禅修 是有想，需要去想，需要去思考很多很多的问题，这是一种禅修。另外一种禅修呢，不想，不去思考，把所有的思维，所有的这些思考全部放下来完全就达到了一个停止的状态，我们的内心达到了一个停止的状态，没有任何的活动这样子心就变成透明的，非常纯洁的，它可以回到原始的状态。
Many people wonder then, when we are resting in this state, what should we be thinking? What should we be thinking about? And in this particular meditation, when we are resting, we are not thinking about anything. There are, of course, different kinds of meditation. There are kinds of discursive meditation in which we do a lot of thinking. We do a lot of contemplation. This kind of meditation requires a lot of thought activity. There is another type of meditation, however, where we abandon all kinds of thought and analytical activity and bring ourselves into a state of stillness, a state of non-activity. And in so doing, it's possible for us to bring our minds into a state of clearness, purity, to restore them to their primordial state.
这个时候的我们的内心的状态我们自己是非常非常清楚的感受，能够感受得到。但是如果让我们用语言表达出来描述的话，那没有办法准确的描述。
So this state of stillness and clarity is one that we are able to clearly and directly experience, but it is one that is difficult for us to convey accurately through language.
没有上下，没有左右，没有内外，可以达到一个这样子的这个状态。但是呢我们自己这个没有上下，没有内外，没有这个左右这样子的状态是可以非常清楚的感受得到。但是呢，所感受到的这个状态呢它就是一个我们的语言是不太好形容的一个状态。
So this state of no up, no down, no left, no right, no outside, no inside. This is one that can be experienced by us, but it is not one that's really able to be conveyed clearly through words.
这是我们的心的本性，相对而言，这个是我们内心的本性，但是它还不是绝对的本性，绝对的本性还要突破了以后呢，在最深的地方我们会发现它的真正的本来的面目。
So this is the basic nature of the mind, or at least from in a relative way. This is still not yet the absolute basic nature of the mind. It's necessary for us to go beyond this and to discover what in fact is the ultimate nature of our mind.
在中国大陆的东北有一个冬天有一个叫做冰雪大世界冰雪大世界你们可能很多人也应该是听说过，有些人可能也去参观过。冰雪大世界是什么呢？就是因为冬天中国北方很冷的，所以呢这个就是这个水很快的时间当中就变成了冰，然后就是一个冰的雕塑，冰可以做成建筑物，可以做成人，可以做成车子等等然后又通过各种的这个五颜六色的灯光，然后呢它就变成一个整个的城市一样，非常非常的漂亮。
In the far northeast of China, every year there is an ice lantern festival. Perhaps many of you have heard of this, and some perhaps have even visited it. Essentially, in this part of China, it's extremely cold, and so water very rapidly becomes ice. And so during this festival, many ice sculptures are made from the ice. The ice is fashioned into people, houses, cars, etc. And all of these sculptures are lit up by lights of different colors, and this forms an entire city of ice sculptures, and it's very beautiful.
但是这个建筑物、人交通工具等等，就像一个真实的城市一样的东西，实际上都是水，水可以变成一个这样子的城市。
So, but all of these sculptures of people, houses, cars, they appear to be like a real city, but in actual fact, they're just made of water. Nevertheless, they are able to appear like a real city.
这个城市最后的时候呢，它会都变成水。
In the end, this entire city will be reduced to water.
我们现在可以往左、往右、往上、往下看一看，都是我们的心，我们的心就变成了建筑物、植物、动物以及各种各样的东西。
And it's possible for us to look up, look down, look to our left, look to our right, and we can see that our mind is becoming, our mind has become buildings, plants, animals, and so forth.
水它为什么变成了一个城市呢？就是因为有外面的这个温度就是因为这个温度的差别，所以水变成了一个城市。
The reason in the example of northeast China that water is able to become a city is because of the temperature conditions that enable this to take place.
我们的心为什么变成了一个宇宙？那就是因为我们的五明，就像我们梦见建筑物世界宇宙一样，我们因为有了五明，我们的心也就变成了这个大自然，变成了宇宙，变成了银河系，变成了地球，变成了各种各样的物质。
So why is it then that our mind becomes the universe? The reason for this is because of the existence of ignorance, and it's through this that our minds become or take on the appearances of buildings, nature, world, matter.
有一天我们的心也就会开始慢慢的融化。慢慢的融化，它也就像整个就是这个冰雪大世界的城市，最后变成了水一样，我们的这个世界也就会总有一天它会融化。
One day, however, our minds will melt, just like the ice city that every year melts back to water. There will be one day when our universe will melt and dissolve too.
融化了以后呢，我们的心就变成了佛的智慧，释迦牟尼佛的智慧。那我们的心就像现在就像冰雪大世界一样，那么这个我们的修心就像这个温度一样，这个修心的温度就上升的时候呢，我们的心也就会开始融化，最后融为佛的智慧。
One day when our minds melt, they will melt into the state of Buddha wisdom. Our minds, however, as they are at the moment, are like the ice sculptures in the ice festival. Our practice, our meditation, is like temperature, the temperature conditions. And by increasing the temperature, our minds are able to melt until finally they melt into the state of Buddha wisdom.
所以我们说控制了我们的心，等于就是控制了整个的世界。
So this is why we say that in being able to control our own minds, we are able to control the entire universe.
那控制的方法，我们从禅修开始。
And in terms of developing the method or a way for controlling our minds, we need to start off with this kind of meditative practice.
好，这个时候呢，我们把我们的心平静下来，不要去干扰它，不要去动它，让它自己慢慢的平静下来。
So first we allow our minds to become still, to become calm. We don't disturb them or disrupt them. We just simply allow our minds to.
这时候呢，我们前面已经讲过了，我们每一个人都是一样，我们的心一定它会，我们不要去动它的话，就不需要做任何的其他的动作，只要不去动它只要不去动它，只要不去干扰它，那它自己就会慢慢的会变成透明和纯洁，或者是平静宁静这样子的状态。
So everyone is the same, as we have spoken about. Just as long as we don't disturb our minds, as long as we don't agitate them, then it is possible for our minds to exist in a state of clarity, of purity, or a state of stillness and tranquility.
但是因为我们刚刚开始学禅定所以我们的这个禅定的功夫目前非常有限所以我们没有办法这个不干扰它，这个不干扰或者是宁静的这个状态，我们没有办法持续很久。
However, when we're just at the beginning of our meditation practice, our ability is extremely limited in remaining in this state. That is, it's extremely difficult for us not to disturb our minds. It's extremely difficult for us to maintain this state of clarity and stillness.
所以就是1-2分钟，甚至是几十秒钟以后呢，我们的这个平静的这个状态会结束结束的原因就是因为另外的一个念头出来了，所以这个念头就干扰了我们的这个宁静的状态，干扰了这个宁静的状态，严重的影响了这个宁静平静的状态，所以这个平静的状态就结束了。
To begin with, in fact, we may only be able to sustain this state for 1 or 2 minutes, or even for a matter of several seconds. Within this short period of time, after this short period of time, our state of tranquility will be over, it will be finished. And the reason for this is the arising of a new thought, and it's the arising of this new thought that disturbs the state of tranquility. It seriously impacts on it.
然后我们就是因为有了一个念头，把这个宁静的状态结束的时候呢，我们一定要及时的发觉，如果我们不知道了，那这样子这个各种各样的念头会继续的那然后呢这个各种各样的念头继续的时候，我们感觉不到，我们以为在打坐，但是呢， 有太多的杂念，这样子以后就10分钟、20分钟、5、6分钟在这个当中会浪费的。
When a new thought arises and brings to an end our state of tranquility, it's important that we immediately notice that this has taken place. Otherwise, if we don't notice immediately, we could go on for another 5 or 6 or even 10 minutes thinking that we're still meditating, but in actual fact, we're just wasting our time.
然后这个时候呢，我们发觉了以后呢，然后立即就要调整，立即就把刚刚诞生的这个念头也让它回归，也不要来干扰这个宁静的状态，也让它慢慢的消失，让它慢慢的这个回归到这个宁静的状态当中，不要让它继续。
So when we immediately notice the arising of a new thought, we need to prevent it from continuing to impact our state of tranquility. So in immediately noticing the arising of a new thought, we need to dissolve this thought.
好，这个就是一个比较具体的方法，还有很多具体的方法呢。因为我们今天时间的关系就其他的不讲，因为还有一个我们前2天在其他地方也详细的介绍过这个很多的具体的方法。那么这个也是有英语的翻译如果我们就听不懂那个藏语或者汉语的人呢，可以继续看这个，可以看这个视频来学习。
So, in terms of the specifics or specific steps and specific instructions regarding this meditation method, we on a previous occasion I gave a fuller teaching on this meditation method. It's available in English translation for those of you who don't understand Chinese or Tibetan.
然后能够听韩语的呢，也可以直接上网看这个上慧灯之光的网，这个上面有这方面的音频、视频，还有电子版的书，这些资料都是比较全面的。
For those of you who understand Chinese, you can go directly online, and there are a lot of my teachings available in video format as well as in audio format and downloadable books as well.
好，然后我们继续介绍这个智慧方面的禅定和这个智慧，我们空心证悟空心的智慧的方面给大家这方面给大家介绍一下一些比较具体的修法。
So what I'd like to go on now with is introducing to you a concrete meditation method for increasing our wisdom or for realizing emptiness.
因为禅修的部分呢，我们刚刚提到了，因为我们前2天讲过了，所以大家可以通过这个网络学习所以我们就禅修方面呢不再讲，我们继续讲其他的，就是讲这个空心方面的。
And the reason that I'm going on to this now is because a couple of days we covered shamatha meditation in more detail. So I'd like to go on now to talking about emptiness meditation.
那证悟空心的作用证悟空心的作用是什么呢？如果我们真正能够证悟空心的话，那就是因为这个证悟空心的智慧可以解决我们内心当中的所有这些负面的情绪，以及这些情绪导致的痛苦。
So what is the function or what is the use of realizing emptiness? Well, if we are able to properly realize emptiness, then the wisdom that is generated thereby is able to completely address, completely eliminate all of our negative mental states and the suffering they generate.
好，然后我们修这个空心呢，可以在这个禅定的基础上继续修，最好就是在这个禅定的基础上继续修空心。
So, emptiness meditation, we can practice on a foundation of shamatha practice. So, in fact, it's best if we practice this way upon our foundation in shamatha practice.
然后这个禅定的基础上继续修的话应该怎么修呢？我们刚才讲了，我们的心就是变成了一个，就达到了一个非常宁静的这个状态的时候呢，然后我们进一步的去了解这个宁静的状态，它到底是什么。
So when we say to practice emptiness meditation on a foundation of shamatha meditation, what we are really speaking about here is continuing our meditation practice after we have reached a state of clarity and stillness. And when we have done this, we go one step further into understanding the nature of this stillness.
如果我们一个人有一个真实的本质或者是本心这样子的话，那应该是在我们的内心的最最最深的地方。
If a person has a basic nature or a fundamental nature to their mind, then this would presumably be at the innermost layer of their mind.
因为除了它以外，其他的我们内心或者是我们的这个身体的里里外外的所有的东西都不是本心。
The reason for this being that aside from everything else about ourselves, our various external layers of our bodies, minds, etc., are not our basic fundamental nature.
都不能说他们是本心，因为它不具备本心这两个字的含义。
We can't call these other aspects of ourself our basic or fundamental nature because they don't fulfill the requirements of this term.
就像在这个物质世界里面就在物质世界里面我们看到的这些物质这个宏观世界它根本就不是物质的本性。如果物质有一个本性的话，那应该是在微观世界当中，而不在宏观世界当中。
So it's just like in the material world around us, all that we see in the macrocosm of the earth, everything that we see here is not the basic nature of these things. If we were going to look for their basic nature, presumably we would need to look to the microcosm.
因为宏观世界是微观世界的产物也就是说这个宏观世界是微观世界所导致的一种错觉，所以它不是本性，它也没有本性本质这两个字的含义。
Because the macrocosm, in fact, is a mistaken, or what we see as the macrocosm is a mistaken perception or a confused perception of the macrocosm itself doesn't fulfill the requirements of basic nature.
所以我们就到这个内心的最深的地方去寻找 它的本心是对的。
So for this reason, to look for our basic nature in the most innermost layers of our mind is the right approach.
因为我们的现实生活当中的我们的这个精神非常的这个浮躁非常的这个暴躁的这个状态，它不是它的本心，它是它的本心的一种反应它就是一种它的本心的反应，或者是本心的产物。
So in our everyday lives, our minds, they're restless, they're tumultuous, and so they are not the basic nature of our mind. They are simply a response or a manifestation of this basic nature.
那么如果它的本心在我们的内心的深处的话，那我们修禅定的时候呢，我们已经达到了这个本心离这个本心比较近的地方。
So, assuming that our basic nature is to be found in the deepest or most innermost layer of our mind, in achieving samadhi, we have already come relatively close to this deepest layer.
我们的心达到了一个这样子的平静的状态的时候呢，如果我们能够再往前走一步再往前突破一步的话，就可以达到这个可以接触到它的真正的原始的状态，也就是禅宗讲的这个明心见性。
So in this state of stillness and calmness, if we're able to go one step further, to go one step beyond this state, it would be possible for us to directly experience the original state of our mind, what is referred to in the Chan tradition as self-nature.
这些都是理论最需要的就是实践或者是方法，需要有一个方法，我们依靠什么方法往前再走一步这个就是最需要了解的。
So all of this is theory. What we need most of all is practice or a method. So what method or practice should we rely on to make this one step further?
走到这个地步的时候呢，我们很多人就感觉到很无奈、很无助，不知道再往上怎么走。
When many people reach this place, they find themselves really not knowing what to do. How should they go further?
因为我们禅定，我们修了，也许花了很长很长的时间然后呢这个平静的状态非常宁静的状态已经达到了但是达到了又怎么样呢？然后它的结果又是什么呢？它会给我们带来什么呢？其实没有发现什么，所以这个时候就我们很多人不知道再往前怎么样走。
The reason is that many people have spent a long period of time cultivating their meditative stability. They've been able to reach a state of meditative calmness and stillness. However, in having achieved this, what's the result? What benefit does this actually give them? Nothing really. And so many people are not sure about how they should progress beyond this.
就是最后的一步最后的一步没有办法突破，所以就是感到很多人就感到很无奈。
So many people, many practitioners, because they're not able to break through with this final step, they find themselves very frustrated.
那这个时候我们为什么感到无奈无助？ 就是因为我们之前开始修行的时候，这些基础没有做好，我们直接就进入了禅定，所以禅定现在修得比较好，但是呢，禅定修到比较高层次的时候呢，然后我们永远都停留在这个禅定当中，突破不了，就是因为开始的时候这个基础的一些该做的事情没有做好。
And the reason that people find themselves in this frustrated state of not knowing what to do is because, to begin with, they didn't lay the foundations for their practice as they should have. That is, they launched straight into cultivating meditative concentration and were then able to do this quite well. They were able to cultivate quite an advanced state of concentration. But essentially, in having cultivated this state, they have not been able to go beyond this.
禅修其实禅修它不是佛教特有的早期的印度的这些很多很多的宗教，除了佛教以外的这些宗教，他们也可以达到这个禅定的很高的境界。
So achieving meditative concentration is not something that is exclusive to the Buddha's teachings. In ancient India, for example, there were a number of Indian spiritual schools whose practitioners were able to achieve a very high level of meditative concentration.
但是他们最后就是突破不了这个时间的这个禅定，这个禅定叫做时间的禅定，还不是处时间。它这个禅定不能让我们走出轮回，所以就是最终修的禅定修得很好，但是最终还要回到轮回当中，继续轮转，继续循环。所以还是没有用。
However, the end result was that practitioners were not able to move beyond this point. And for this reason, their level of meditative concentration was, or their type of meditative concentration was only worldly or mundane meditative concentration. It was not trans-mundane. That is, their meditative concentration was not able to enable them to go beyond and transcend cyclic existence. So for this reason, despite having reached a very high level of meditative concentration, these practitioners ultimately had to return to cyclic existence again. So we could say that the end result was that their meditative practice was of no use.
就像火箭，通过火箭的力量就把宇宙飞船或者是卫星这个人造卫星可以送到太空的轨道上，但是最后这个火箭它自己就变成了太空的垃圾。
So it's rather like a rocket. The power of the rocket enables the universe or the world to be passed through. It enables the
火箭它就变成了太空垃圾，所以最后这个人造宇宙飞船和太空火箭最后要分离，所以这个宇宙飞船呢离开了火箭以后呢，还要继续前进。
So, just as a rocket is able to convey a spaceship into out of space, ultimately the rocket itself becomes rubbish in space. The spaceship itself has to continue onwards.
同样的，我们通过禅定的力量，可以把我们推到离 本心离明心见心很近的地方，但是最后我们还是要突破这个世俗的这个禅定必须要离开它，然后呢，我们把世俗的禅定突破了以后呢，然后要继续前进。
So it's the same with our meditation practice. So whilst meditating, cultivating meditative concentration is able to convey us to a point where we are very close to realizing the basic nature of self. It is necessary for us ultimately to go beyond this kind of worldly meditation practice and take one step further.
然后就是离跟这个世俗的禅定分离了以后，继续往前走，继续前进的是谁呢？就是证悟空性的智慧。证悟空性的智慧要突破世俗的禅定，然后要继续往前走。
So, what it is that parts from the worldly the cultivation of worldly meditative concentration is the wisdom of realizing emptiness. This is what parts us from this worldly meditative concentration and continues to take one step further.
这个时候证悟空性的智慧能不能离跟这个世俗的禅修分离突破，就要看我们刚才讲的当初的这个修行的基础。如果当初修行的时候这个基础的修法没有修好的话，那个时候呢，就是没有办法跟这个世俗的禅修脱离就超越不了，突破不了，所以呢，就是从轮回当中走不出去的。
Whether or not the wisdom of realizing emptiness is able to separate from our worldly meditation cultivation, that is, whether it's able to go beyond it, to transcend it, really depends on the foundations of our practice. And if we haven't laid these properly in place, then it won't be possible for us to transcend this level.
基础的这些修行力量是什么呢？就是出离心像从藏传佛教的角度来讲，先修思前行培养出离心。
So, what in terms of our foundational practice, what is it in these practices that supplies the power for this later part of our practice? Well, the first thing is renunciation. So in Tibetan Buddhism, we cultivate the 4 external preliminaries in order to cultivate renunciation.
然后这个修完了以后，就修无家心先修大乘佛教的皈依，然后第二就修菩提心。
And then we move on to the 5 inner preliminaries. So first accumulating or practicing refuge, and then bodhicitta.
然后再修第3，就是修金刚萨埵的忏悔的方法，来把我们过去的所有的这些罪过清净干净。
The third of the internal preliminaries is Vajrasattva confession practice, which enables us to purify our past negative karma.
然后就修这个修曼扎罗，那通过这个曼扎罗积累福报就所有该具备的这些资粮全部具备。这叫做积累资粮， 资粮就是比如说我们到某一个地方，我们要飞到某一个地方的话，我们需要买机票，那买机票需要钱，那我们先去赚钱，先去赚这个买机票的钱一样。我们要证悟空心的话，就需要一定各方面的这个力量。那么其中一个就是资粮，那就首先供这个曼荼罗积累资粮。
The fourth of the 5 internal preliminaries is mandala offering, and we do this to accumulate merit. Just as if we want to take an airplane somewhere, we need to have a ticket. In order to get the ticket, we need to have the money to pay for it. So the first thing we do is set about earning money to buy the ticket. In respect of realizing emptiness, we need different energies to support us in this process. So mandala offering enables us to accumulate the necessary merit.
然后第5个，最后一个叫做上师瑜伽。在这个证悟空心的这个当中呢，过程当中呢，上师给我们的这个加持力量是一个非常非常重要的。如果没有上师的加持还有就是这些我们忏悔还有积累资粮这些方面没有做到位，那么这样子的话，我们就是不能突破这个世间的世俗的这个禅定。这个时候我们已经走到了最高点，但最高点就突破不了。
And then the 5th of the 5 inner preliminaries is the practice of guru yoga. In the process of realizing emptiness, the blessing and the power from our teacher is extremely important. Without this blessing and without the benefit of confession practice and accumulating merit, then it is not possible for us to go beyond, to transcend this level of meditative concentration at a worldly level.
然后这些最基本的这些力量，最基本的条件全部具备了，也就是说我们把四加心和五加心修的都很标准都每一个都修到标准，修到了他自己的要求，这样子的话，那我们能够突破这个世俗的禅定，就是因为超越世俗禅定的这个力量条件都已经具备了，所以这个时候呢，突破不是很难。
So these 4 external preliminaries and 5 inner preliminaries are the energy or the conditions that we need to have in place. Once we have practiced or cultivated this practice to the appropriate level or to an appropriate standard, then we are then equipped with the capacity to transcend this worldly level of meditative practice.
这个时候呢，我们需要去听一下大圆满的这个具体的引导。或者是如果想学禅宗的话，那就要照禅宗的非常具体的这个指点如果是想学藏传佛教的话，像大圆满、大受印这些到现在为止有很多很多非常好的上师经验非常丰富的这样子的上师还在。那么这个时候呢，我们就找一个这样子的上师，然后就听一下去接受一下这个他的具体的这个指导，具体的引导这样通过这个引导，我们很快就突破了这个世俗的禅定。
So at this point, what we need to do is to receive instructions on Dzogchen practice or if we are students of the Chan teaching, we need to receive detailed instructions on Chan meditation. Alternatively, we need to receive or can receive detailed practice instructions on Mahamudra practice. At the moment, there are still a great many masters of the Dzogchen and Mahamudra teachings or traditions still alive. And so at this point we need to receive specific instructions as to how we practice from herein. We need specific guidance from a qualified teacher. And once we receive this, then it is possible for us to transcend and go beyond very quickly this worldly level of meditative practice.
好，这些每一个步骤、每一个环节都做得比较标准，这样子的话，这样子一步一步往上走，修心是非常非常有把握的，一定每一个人一定会证悟的，会突破的。
If every practitioner proceeds with each step and each stage one at a time and completes each stage and each step to the requisite standard, then it is guaranteed that they will realize the nature of emptiness.
然后我们简单的说一下这个，在这个达到了这个禅定的时候，禅修达到比较高峰的时候呢，然后再进一步的去做什么，进一步要去做什么，这个简单的说一下。
So I'd like to talk briefly and in a simple way about how we proceed after we have reached a state of stillness and calmness in our shamatha meditation.
这个时候呢，我们的心已经变成了像透明的水，非常干净的水一样，它已经达到了这个地步了。但是呢，这个透明的水到底它是什么，我们还没有弄清楚，我们还没有搞清楚。这个时候呢，我们进一步的去了解它原来就是一个很浑浊的状态，它慢慢就变成了一个非常平静非常纯洁这样子的状态。但是这个纯洁的东西到底是什么，我们这个时候还没有搞清楚。
So our mind now exists in a state of clarity, just like water in a very still state. However, we still haven't gained a complete understanding of the nature of this stillness, the nature of this clarity. So it is necessary for us to go one further step in terms of understanding this. That is, originally we had water that was turbid, and then we brought it or let it become clear and still and its nature. However, what the nature, in fact, of this purity is something that we still need to gain an understanding of.
好，这个方法到时候我们禅定修得比较好，心比较平静的时候呢，然后我们在这个基础上开始观察，开始了解自己的这个心，那就是它的本质。这时候呢，我们拿什么东西来看我们自己的心？眼睛、耳朵都不行的，这些5个感官都看不到我们的心。那唯一的直接能够感受到它的本质的是他自己，所以让他自己去了解他自己。
So when we have reached a relatively stable state of stillness through our shamatha practice, then we go one step further in observing the state of this basic nature. And what is it that we use to observe this basic nature? Is it our eyes, our ears, or any other one of our 5 senses? The only thing, indeed, that is able to experience the mind is the mind itself. And so at this point, we let our mind understand itself.
好，这个时候呢，我们的心平时我们的心，我们用我们这颗心来了解外面的这个世界，去感受外面的世界。那么现在呢，不是往外面去了解感受，往里让他自己去感受他自己，让他自己去体会一下他自己，也就是说让他自己去看一下他自己到底长什么样子。
So usually our mind is looking into the external world and is focused on understanding the external world. However, at this point, the mind is looking in on itself. It is experiencing itself. Essentially, the mind is taking a good look at itself to see what it is really like.
我们开始了解的时候呢，比如说我们的心往回他看自己的时候，就会有两个情况，除了这两个情况以外呢，不会有第三个第一个是什么呢？他也许就在一个非常平静的状态当中如不动的停留在一个很平静的状态当中，他会发现这样子，这是一个。要不的话，那他就会发现这个内心当中有很多很多的这个不断的念头就像波涛汹涌的大海一样，有太多的这个念头，就他会发现这两个，除了这两个以外就没有第三个。
So when the mind turns to look at itself, there are only two possible things it can discover, or two possible states that it can discover itself in. The first is one of stillness, that the mind, when it turns to look at itself, discovers a state of ongoing stillness. This is one possibility. The other possibility is that when the mind turns to look at itself, it discovers many thoughts arising. It discovers a great deal of movement, rather like the turbulent face of the ocean. Beyond these two possibilities, there is not a third.
不管他发现他在停留的状态，或者是在混乱的状态都没问题。他发现的时候，他感受到的时候呢，那他就第一个，如果是平静的状态的话呢，那他要去了解这个平静的状态是什么样子，进一步的去了解。如果他在有不断的这个杂念都诞生的话，那就看杂念到底是什么，进一步的去了解杂念这个到底是什么样子。
So regardless of what state it encounters itself in, it doesn't matter. If the mind discovers itself in a state of stillness, then the mind goes one step further to understand more deeply this state of stillness. If, on the other hand, the mind discovers itself in a state of movement, of great discursive activity, then the mind goes one further step into understanding further this state of discursive activity.
那这样子他去进一步的去了解的时候呢，他会发现什么呢？他会发现不管是就像波涛汹涌的一样的状态也好，或者是就像一个静静的湖面的状态一样的也好，这两个不管是哪一个，他会发现这两个都是虽然是可以感受到一个这样子的这个现象，但是它的本质都是不是真实的，它的本质都是空性透明空性，他会感受到这两个都是空性，这两个都是不真实的 会体会到，这叫做证悟空性。
So when the mind takes one further step to examine either of these states, regardless of whether it is the mind in a state of a raging ocean or the mind in a state of a very still lake, even though the mind may encounter the phenomenon of either of these two, neither of these states are the essence of the mind. In looking one step further, the mind is able to discover that both of these states are empty of inherent existence, that they are both not ultimately real. And this is what we refer to as the realization of emptiness.
他体会到这个他的心的本性是空性非常非常清楚的体会到他的心的本性是空性那这个体会它不是推理不是推理，而是自己的经验非常清楚的感受到这两个都是空性这样子的时候呢，我们从这个比较可以说是比较高的层面了解了我们的心的本性。
So when the mind clearly experiences its basic nature as emptiness, this is not something that is done through reasoning or any discursive reasoning. This is a direct personal experiencing that both of these states of the mind are empty. So this is a realization of the emptiness or the realization of the basic nature of mind from a relatively advanced level.
这个时候呢证悟了空性的时候，那它的作用是什么呢？这时候我们从一个这个噩梦里面醒过来了一样，然后我们会发现万事万物它都是我们的心的一个投影，那么创造这个万事万物的这个创造者，它本身也就是一个虚幻的，也是一个虚幻的一个虚拟的东西，而不是一个真实的东西。这个时候呢，他会发现万事万物，包括这个宇宙世界，包括我们的心都是一个虚拟的世界非常清楚地体会到它这是一个虚拟的世界。
So what is the use or the result of realizing emptiness? Well, it's really just the same as waking up from a terrible nightmare. In realizing emptiness, we understand that every single thing is merely just an appearance or a projection of our own minds, and that our minds are the creator of all this which is illusory and not real. So both the external phenomenal world and our minds themselves, that they are both illusory in nature, is something that we gain clear experiential understanding of.
这个时候所有的烦恼，比如说嗔恨仇恨、生气贪婪等等，这些所有的烦恼，都是就像一个轻轻的风吹过去了一样就不会给我们留下任何的痕迹。也就是说，这些所有的烦恼，它失去了它的力量，所以这些烦恼就根本就不能影响到我们。
So the result of this is that all of our afflictions, all of our negative emotions and mental states whether it be anger or hatred or greed, appear to us only as a light breeze. They pass over us, but they're not able to leave a lasting trace. That is, they are stripped of all their force and power.
然后这个时候呢，我们把所有的烦恼都断掉了，断除了。就断除的意思就是说，这些烦恼，任何一个烦恼都不会影响到我们。然后再往前走的话，烦恼它本身也就慢慢的会减少，甚至最后会消失。
So the effect of this is the elimination of our suffering and affliction. That is to say, that our afflictions from this point are not able to affect us. And then as we continue or sustain this practice, the suffering or affliction themselves will gradually become increasingly less.
这个时候呢，我们有些人就会担心那这样子我们是不是对这个世俗的生活也就失去了心性不感兴趣？那这样子我们是不是也就是享受不到这个生活给我们带来的幸福其实这个担心是不需要的。这个时候呢，我们的生活就更加的，我们生活的品质更加的提高。这个时候呢，可以享受到更高级别的幸福和快乐。
So many people worry that at this point they will lose interest in their worldly lives, that in realizing emptiness they'll no longer be able to enjoy happiness in life. However, there's really no reason for this worry. The reason being that from this point onwards we are able to enjoy an even higher kind of happiness or a higher level of happiness.
然后这个时候还有一个呢，当我们自己从这个噩梦当中醒过来的时候呢，我们会更加的关心关爱还在继续做噩梦的人，还没有醒来的人这就是说大乘佛教讲的证悟空性以后对众生会有更加的慈悲心的意思。
And in addition to this, as we wake up from the nightmare ourselves, we will have increased care and concern for those who are still in the nightmare. That is to say, this is what the Mahayana teachings are referring to when it is said that in realizing emptiness, one will have greater compassion for all other beings.
好，这个我们今天给大家简单的介绍了一下一个禅修的方法和突破这个禅修继续往前走的一个简单的方法。但是我们今天讲的都是一个框架性的比较简单的方法，还要真的要修的话呢，我们还要进一步的去了解，要系统的学习去修行。
So what I've taught today is a simple method for cultivating shamatha, as well as a method for going beyond this one step and proceeding further. What I have presented, though, is a relatively simple outline or a simple approach. If this is something that you really intend to practice, then it's necessary to study and learn about this further.
这些就是正确的路，解脱的道，就是佛教的精华，这叫做大乘佛教，这叫做佛教，这就是佛教的重点核心的思想。所以我们真的想学佛的人就是要学到这些，而不要经常 就这个搞太多的新式的东西啊，就更严重的还有商业化的东西，因为我们佛教界这个搞商业化的东西现在就越来越多，非常非常的严重。然后呢，形式化的东西也很多啊。形式化的东西呢，就是像我们搞很多非常非常隆重的法会，还有很多这方面的，但是没有什么实质的啊，像慈悲、智慧啊。我们的佛教讲的这个佛教的核心啊，比如说我们刚才讲的这个心识是什么呢？就是含金量不高的啊这些活动。含金量的金是什么呢？就很简单两个，一个是慈悲心、菩提心、慈悲心，另外一个是智慧啊。没有这个智慧，没有慈悲心啊，也就是说不能给我们带来慈悲心和智慧的这样子的活动啊，基本上都叫做心识的活动，心识上的活动。然后呢，就跟金钱有关系的这些呢，不仅仅是心识，而且是这个商业化。那在这样子的商业化的活动和形式化的活动当中，佛教的核心就慢慢大家都找不到。所以呢，这个在某种程度上，实际上我们自己在破坏佛教啊。所以我们真正的想学佛的人，必须要知道释迦牟尼佛他自己的思想，释迦牟尼佛他自己的这个观点是什么，这个必须要弄清楚。
Teachings on the path, teachings about the path of liberation are actually the core of the Buddhist teachings. And those who wish to be real Buddhists really need to study this. So for this reason, it is best if we don't invest too much time in ritualistic and formalistic practices, and certainly not commercialized kinds of Buddhist activities either. So examples would be really over-the-top Dharma assemblies and other activities like this. That is, other activities that don't assist us in increasing our compassion and wisdom, activities that don't help us in this. So these kinds of ritualistic or formulaic or commercialized activities, with an excess of these kinds of things, it becomes increasingly difficult for us to locate the core of the Buddhist teachings. And so we could say by placing an undue emphasis on these things, to some degree we are actually harming the Buddhist tradition. So it's very important for those of us who wish to be Buddhists and wish to practice Buddhism to really gain a proper understanding of Buddhist thought, Buddhist doctrine, what the content of the teachings is.
所以我们所有的佛教的中心、佛教的寺庙以及佛教徒大家一定要重视，一定要高度重视三个字，就是闻思修。就这三个佛教的寺庙必须要有闻思修，然后佛教的这些中心也必须要有闻思修，然后呢，佛教徒个人的生活当中也必须要有闻思修。闻就是听闻佛法，思考佛教讲的这些道理，然后修就是自己的个人的这个训练内心的训练，这三个是不能没有的。如果这三个没有了，那么佛教的寺庙、佛教的中心都失去了真正的意义。
So it's very important that Buddhist temples or Dharma centers, and indeed all individual Buddhists, very much prioritize three words or three activities, and these activities are listening, contemplating, and practicing. These listening, contemplating, and practicing need to be incorporated or provided by temples and Dharma centers, and individual Buddhists in their everyday lives need to incorporate these three activities too. So in listening, we're referring to studying and hearing the Buddha's teachings. Contemplating or reflecting is thinking about and contemplating the content of those teachings, and practicing refers to meditation or mind training, internalizing those teachings. Without these three things, then Dharma centers and temples lose their purpose and meaning entirely.
那我们怎么样系统的闻思修呢？闻，比如说像我们今天这样子，今天和明天还前2天这样子的课，有佛教的这样子的课的话，大家要积极参加。我们现在佛教徒有一个比较普遍的一个问题，就是一个这样子的现象，比如说观顶还有就是什么消灾延寿的法会还有火供什么这些参加的人非常非常的多，实际上就是一个功利的心就是我们以为我去参加了这个消灾延寿的法会就可以消我的很多很多的灾，所以我就不需要生病然后我可以长寿健康等等，就为了达到这么一个目标，然后参加的人就特别的多真正的佛教的课就是佛教传播释迦牟尼佛的真正的智慧，传播释迦牟尼佛的思想这样子的活动就是佛教的课。那这个参加的人非常的少，在哪里都是这样子，所以我们佛教徒的这种观念，我觉得必须要做一个调整否则的话，我们走的路不一定是佛教。
So in terms of the first of these activities, listening to the Buddhist teachings, when we have opportunities to attend classes or live teachings, such as the teachings we've had over the past couple of days, we should make the most of these opportunities and attend them. Usually there are a lot of people interested in attending activities like tantric empowerments, Dharma assemblies or rituals oriented to averting misfortune and bad luck, fire pujas and the like. However, the reason that so many people attend is often due to self-interest. That is, they hope that by attending these activities they will achieve good health and be free from illness. And so this results in a situation where the number of activities that involve transmitting the real content of the Buddhist teachings are few, and that these activities are not well attended. So it's really important, I think, that Buddhists need to change or reform their ideas somewhat. Otherwise, the path that we're traveling upon may not end up being a Buddhist path at all.
所以就是希望我们所有的佛教徒，或者是我们今天在座的，在以后的日子里，就在学佛的过程当中我们就要抓住这个终点佛教的终点，这个侧终点不能错。这个错了以后呢，我们以为自己在学佛，学了10年、8年、20年。但是最终我们也不知道我自己所学的结果成果是什么，没有看到什么成果，没有看到什么进步，还就是跟当初是一模一样学了10年20年没有发现任何的进步，那这个是非常遗憾的。所以我们真正的去学佛的话，那一年比一年有进步的，有进步，这个进步是自己能够看得到的能够看得见摸得着的这样子的进步。所以我们所有的这个 佛教的中心、佛教的寺庙以及我们佛教的各种各样的这个团体，要强调这个闻思修，这样子才能够一方面呢，自己在这个佛教学佛的过程当中，可以不断的提升自己的这个自己的智慧和自己的这个慈悲心的层次可以不断的可以提升。另外一个呢，我们也可以在这个现代社会当中可以帮助很多很多的人可以帮助很多的人，所以我们烧香拜佛这些就不需要太多，但是呢也并不是说完全不需要烧香拜佛也可以，这是我们对佛的一个恭敬，我们对佛陀的一个表达了一个我们自己的对佛陀的一个恭敬的一个态度可以有烧香拜佛可以有，但是呢烧香拜佛不解决任何的问题，我们烧了一辈子的香，那我们的烦恼一点都没有减少，所以如果我们说现在我没有任何的进步，但是未来会有，那也不一定，现在没有，未来突然间会不会有也说不清楚，所以因和果都是相应的。如果未来要即将发生什么事情的话，应该有一点点前兆，比如说要下雨，那首先天空当中会有乌云，没有云，从蓝天当中怎么下雨同样的，我们也不要等到以后突然间发生什么奇迹这个不太可能。佛教讲因和果，有因才有果，不会有发生什么奇迹，所以呢我们还是要脚踏实地如果想学佛的话，那就要实实在在，稍微要花一点时间，不需要花太多的时间。当然如果能够花很长时间的话，那有更多的收获，但是呢我们把时间分配好生活工作，然后就是修行，把时间分配好，这样子的话每一个人的学佛都有明显的进步，这叫做自利利他这样子我们自己有进步的时候呢，我们也可以帮助更多的人，这叫做自利利他，这就是大乘佛教的精神希望大家重视这三个字，闻思修。
So it's my sincere hope that from now onwards that all Buddhists grasp the main point or the main content of the Buddhist teachings and are not mistaken. That is that they don't spend 8 or 10 or potentially 20 years thinking that they're Buddhists and practicing Buddhism, but ultimately not having any results after 10 or 20 years of so-called practice, still being the same as they originally were. If this is the case, it's indeed an extremely regrettable outcome indeed. With real practice of the Dharma, we can see progress every single year, and this is progress that we can know for ourselves. It's extremely tangible. So for this reason, Dharma centers, temples, Buddhist groups, etc., really need to prioritize listening, contemplating and practice, the conditions for all of these three, so that we all as practitioners continue to have the possibility of increasing in our development, that is increasing in our wisdom and the level of our wisdom and the level of our compassion. Through doing so, not only will we be increasing our own wisdom and compassion, but we will also therefore be in a position to better help others. So in terms of ritual practice like making incense offerings and so forth, this is not to say that we don't need any of this or that it's not good. Of course, making incense offerings is a sign of respect and reverence. It's an expression of our attitude. It's fine. However, making incense offerings in itself isn't able to solve any problem. It's possible that we can make a lifetime of incense offerings and yet not experience any reduction whatsoever in our own suffering. So it's important that all of us as Buddhists spend time, allocate time for our practice. It may not be possible to allocate a tremendous amount of time, yet nevertheless, if we do divide our time properly, we can have enough time for our work, for our life, and for practice as well. So through doing so, not only will we gain clear benefit for ourselves, we'll also be able to assist others. And this is what we refer to as benefiting self and benefiting other. So this is the spirit, in fact, of the Mahayana teachings. So everybody, please do pay due attention to this threefold formula of study, contemplation, and practice.
好，但是我们像这样子面对面学习的机会，参加佛教的这样子的课程，可能也许不多。我们佛教在各个地方，就是消灾延寿、观定什么长寿这样发财的这个活动很多，但是呢，讲佛教的教义、具体的修行这样子的这个机会可能不是很多。那如果是没有这样机会的话，我们可以通过网络学习，目前有网络学习班，就像这个菩提学会，还有慧灯禅修班这样子的，有一些网络的这个禅修，或者是网络的学习的一些佛教的这个课程。那这些里面呢，也可以学到一些，也可以系统的学到一些佛教的常识，还有佛教的论点，还有佛教的一些具体的修法。如果大家感兴趣的话，也可以参加。那总而言之，我们不管是通过网络学习，或者是通过我们现在这样子的学习也好，不管怎么学习，如果真正的想学佛的话，那必须要有这个闻思修，否则的话是没有办法学佛的。
Opportunities for face-to-face teachings, however, might not be so many. It's might be the case due to an excess of festivals and rituals and empowerments and so forth, that the opportunity to attend teachings where the Buddhist view and meditation methods are taught are not so many. If this is the case, it's possible that we can study on the internet. There are online Dharma study communities such as the Puti Xiehui and the Huideng Chanxiu Ban that are potential options. Through in either of these groups, it's possible to systematically study Buddhist theory, general knowledge, as well as some practice methods as well. In any case, whatever the situation may be, if we really do want to study the Dharma, it's necessary that we do pay heed to the study, contemplation, and practice of the teachings.
好，我们学习可以通过网络学习，然后通过网络学习，大家可以修四加行和五加行。
So even though it may be possible to study via the internet,
家清的这个仪轨叫做开显解脱道，大圆满的前行仪轨，开显解脱道。那这个我们修家清的话就念诵这个仪轨，这仪轨很方便也不复杂，内容都是很齐全的一个非常好的仪轨。
So the name of this transmission is the Luminous Path to Liberation. It's a transmission for the Dzogchen preliminary practices. It can be relatively easily recited. It's not particularly long, and yet it's extremely comprehensive.
好，这个仪轨的具体的念诵的方法，或者是这个修行的方法慧灯之光能够看得懂中文的，就可以看《慧灯之光》第2本里面讲得很清楚。
For those of you who can read Chinese, how we go about reciting this liturgy and practicing it, I've written a chapter in the second volume of my Wisdom Light book series that addresses this.
那其他的我们不能看这个韩文的，可以看英文版的大圆满的前心啊，谱线上是眼角。还有就是大圆满前心的前心北王炉啊，这些都是非常具体的修心的引导文。
For those of you who don't read Chinese, then you can read English versions of the words of my perfect teacher, as well as other introductions to the doctrine preliminaries as well.
好，我们最后大家做回向。
Also, we are now going to dedicate our merit from today's teaching.
说能得以当这是八年多年你别让那把些，结果那句我弄着吧，这边做连着啊着日修，我们阿红班子人个这把马色的。我们阿红班整个这把马色的红，我们阿红班整个这把马色的红。谢谢大家，阿弥陀佛。